Talking to Ray about one of his things you put on Facebook, I take it. That's what we're talking about?
Yeah, just saying that, just digging into a little bit of the background of a handful of the prisoners at Ubon. It's remarkable, really, what background they have. You know, I mean, as you gathered off Facebook this week, the story of Solomon Abbas, the Dutch Jew chap, tragic circumstances of virtually his mother and father were taken to work camps and concentration camps. Sobibor and Malhausen. I think I've got those correct. I'm not too familiar with them, but they were killed there. And Solomon had 13 brothers and sisters, 3 of which died before they reached their mid-teens. 5 of his others were taken to Auschwitz, and they were all killed on the same day. And there was only one surviving brother, and he lived to the age of 83, I think it was, in Switzerland. He died in the early 1990s. It just beggars belief, you know, what they had.
As someone said on Facebook, to live with that the rest of your life must have been terrible.
Yeah, you can't imagine it, can you? It's
no.
Your whole family just gone. But other stories as well. I mean, David Sartin's father, John, his father was in Special Forces, and that's what we're going to investigate in. We're going to Singapore. The old haunts where John Sartin was an instructor for the old 101 STS, a special training school. The building now in which he was working has now been demolished, and it is a dockyard. But we're going to try and find it because it's part of David's family history. And then we're going to go up to Kuala Lumpur, and we're spending about a week in that area, a place called Fraser's Hill, where his father was operating behind Japanese lines, blowing up bridges and trains and all sorts of things with Freddie Spencer Chapman, who's written a book called The Jungle is Neutral.
Yeah.
And it's got John Sartin's activities in there. But he was captured and put into Pudu jail, and from there went up to Thailand and eventually Ubon. So, the background of his story is interesting. And also, one of the American prisoners, a chap called Mervyn Mallant, was on the USS Houston that got blown up in the early part of the war. He was one of the survivors of that. So it's great, all these sort of background information of these chaps who were all brought together and under different circumstances. It's fascinating.
I had a weird one during the week. She came on Facebook, joined the FEPOW family. Her grandfather was in Korea. Did you see that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really weird because she said he was a Japanese POW. So when I started looking it up, he wasn't a Japanese POW at all. He was a German POW in Stella 12A. And so he wasn't a Japanese POW. But then I went on further and he was captured in Korea. So he was a POW in Germany, and in 1951 he was captured in Korea, and so he's a POW in Korea. What luck! Being captured twice.
Well, some of the guys that were Japanese POWs were again captured in Korea because they stayed in the army. I mean, my father was very fortunate not to have been posted to Korea.
Yeah. What did he stay in after the war?
Yeah, he stayed until 1951.
Oh, yeah. That was he a territorial?
No, regular army.
No, he was a big, yeah. So
Oh,
my
yeah,
dad was territorial, so
he joined in
he,
1927 when he was 15.
oh, yeah,
Joined as a boy trumpeter.
yeah, yeah. Dad was territorial, so when he came back, of course, he came out, so he didn't carry on at all. But that was a job at the time. He did tell me that was a hell of a job to find work.
Yeah.
And he used to work as on a shoe last. You know what a shoe last is,
Yeah.
making shoes.
Yeah.
He used to work on the shoe last. Now, he said that was really good money before he was called up. But then he worked for Miller's, a factory in Yarmouth. But after the war, they all closed down. So he had to find work. So in the end, he worked at Eastern Electric. So he got a job at Eastern Electric. But he said that was a hell of a job to get work after the war. So anyway, yeah, it's been an interesting week. I'm not going to go into our moving bit because I'm fed up with it. But the rest of it, I mean, there's been a lot of people asking information. The trouble is, there's one on there now, and I keep looking at it. Should I look into it? But they don't give what regiment he was in, what service number he had. They don't give everything, so other people have started going on there. There's one put information about an Australian, another about, and when you look it up, there's about 6 different men with the same name. So,
oh yeah, Easton, something
yeah,
like that.
Easton, yeah, and there's so many with the same name, and you know, to start looking, you might be going on the wrong person, and
well, what's
and
interesting,
you're just wasting time.
I think she's looking for an Aussie. I'm not sure, but somebody obviously bought a page up from the British archives.
Yeah.
But the other one was from Mansell.com, and that was all Australians. I wonder where he got that
Australian. From. Yeah, well, she didn't say if he was Australian or British.
No.
But he was captured in Java.
Yep.
And then sent to
across with
Burma.
A-Force, wasn't it?
He went Burma end. But really, to start looking it up, you might have the wrong one, and you're just wasting. Because it takes me about 3 or 4 hours to look it all up and then put it on the page.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And really, you're just wasting time.
Yeah.
I mean, the first one did put down Australian, but then somebody else put down British, and when you look it up, there is about 5 or 6 different.
All with the same name but different initials. Yeah.
You definitely need something to go on. Yeah. But so trip-wise, you're getting ready, right?
Yeah, getting ready. Got my jungle formula to ward off the mosquitoes.
That's going to be a long trip, though.
Yeah, I'm away for 2 months actually, because I'm staying on in. The trip with David is for 3 weeks, and we end up in Ubon, and I'm staying on there till beginning of April.
With your metal detector?
Yes.
Yeah. Any more bombs?
No, I did a couple of searches on the last trip, and still just digging up bits of shrapnel, which it's becoming less exciting now, to find that. But the last trip was pretty good. I mean, you're still finding things. There was a story that around the camp that a moat was dug, and I think I found a section of that moat. It's certainly not a natural feature of the ground, and quite deep. What else was there? I found more bricks for the stove, so I've now got a collection of about 30 odd bricks that my wife is sort of saying, "What are we going to do with these, darling?"
Yeah.
But they're in a box upstairs, so that's okay. what else did I find? Just trying to think. I've been trying to sort of map the area where I think the camp extended. When you think there was 3,000 men there and 100 men to a hut, it's a pretty big area. Because with some camps you can find sort of little sketch maps of the layout, but I've not been able to find anything on Ubon.
Oh.
A bit unfortunate. Not yet, anyway. I might be looking in the wrong places, but yeah. So it's all coming on, and I've been working very, very hard on getting the first draft of the book finalised, which I'm pretty much there now. Another week or so, and I'll have the first draft ready for somebody to read through. So it's quite an extensive story. I've got 50,000 words, so quite a lot on a camp.
I haven't done any more to mine. I just left it because the trouble is you keep getting stopped. People asking you different things, and you get away from it, and it's a hell of a job to get back into it, isn't it, Keith?
Yep.
So I've just left it at the moment. I don't think I'll ever go back to it. It's the thing is, what do you do? People keep asking questions, and
Yeah, that's right.
that's
Think
important.
yourself,
That's important to keep it moving, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But
one great thing this week, if I could just add, just remembered last Sunday, I visited the house of a lady called Fenella France down near Rugby, and she has the original copies of the Ubon Camp newspaper called Newsphere, issues 1, 2, and 3. And I already had issue 2 from Major Smiley's collection at the Imperial War Museum in London. And I knew there was another 2 editions because that was edition 2, so there must have been an edition 1. And there was a reference to the next edition in edition 2. And purely by chance, about a year ago, it was to do with Meg Parks and her scouting around for the art collection, because in the edition 2 of the newsletter, there's a lot of cartoon drawings by a Dutch artist called Van Holter. And I mentioned this to Meg, and she didn't quite fit her scheme of things, because she was looking for British artists, not Dutch ones, but nevertheless she was grateful. But at the same time, she must have been talking to Lizzie Oliver, because Lizzie had received a letter from this lady, Fenella France, saying that she had these copies of the newsletter, and she wanted to send them to the Imperial War Museum to archive, keep in a safe place. And Lizzie contacted me, and over the last 12 months, I've tried to keep a correspondence going with Fenella. And at last weekend, I went down to a house to look at these copies, and she has the original ones. Her father was the editor of the magazine.
Oh, grief! Yeah. What a find!
Yeah. And she said that she didn't particularly want it broadcasting about that she got these copies. So I've been signed to say I won't distribute them, but I have.
That's fair enough.
I've got copies of them. But it's a bit of a shame, really, because I'm sure a lot of people will be interested. The articles in it are split really between, and you've got to put yourself in the mindset of the men in the camp, because they had no news of what was going on the outside. And the BBC had set up broadcasts from Calcutta, especially for servicemen in the Far East, giving out news. And they had a radio that was donated by the Thai people that they set up in the canteen. And every evening, I don't know what time, but in the evening time, they would broadcast the latest news. and they would sit in the canteen and transcribe what was being broadcast, and then publish it in the newsletter. So you get a lot of stories about what's happening in Europe, you know, and what happened with the end of the war over here. They had a lot of articles about what life was like in back home in England, with news on theatre, cinema, fashion, transport. There's a good article about motorcycles, and there's a really good article about the atomic bomb, how it works, and you know what it was all about, because they didn't know about atomic bombs. They couldn't believe that just one bomb would be capable of doing the damage that it did. So one of the scientific minds in the camp wrote this very, very long article about the atomic bomb and how it worked. And then there's a mixture of other things about what's happening in the camp. There's a report on a football match that they had with the local Ubon football team. There's a story about, which I find really good, because there was a dog called Peggy, and Peggy came with the POWs all the way from Singapore, went all the way up the camps, stayed in the camps along the railway, ended up in Ubon. And one of the prisoners, an Australian chap, I think he was called Hugh Adams, he wrote some memoirs on his time as a POW, and he ended up at Ubon. And he mentions this Peggy the dog, and Peggy the dog got a very amorous relationship with another dog at Ubon. And in the middle of a parade, they were very unabashed and did what dogs do. And the result was there was 8 little puppies.
Oh,
and there's an article about this in the newsphere as well. The comical one. The editor interviewed Peggy the dog. Things like that. So it's a great, they're great reads, and I'm sure that I don't know.
I take it that was a lot of woofle.
Woofle, yeah.
So that was the highlight of the week. At long last, I've located them.
The radio, you said they had it in the canteen. Were they allowed it?
This is after liberation.
After. Yeah. But because I was thinking, would they allow that?
Yeah. There is actually another interesting article. You've reminded me of the way they smuggled a radio out of one of the camps, I think, to go to Tamarkan, when the officers were split from the rest of the prisoners. And they had a radio, and they wanted to take it with them, but they didn't know how to take it. So they smuggled it in the bedroll of a Japanese officer.
Yeah. I've heard that one.
Yeah. So that was interesting. But they must have had some sort of generators as well, mustn't they? Because unless it was a battery radio, I don't know in those days.
Well, I did do, because I'm a radio and television engineer, and I did do an article a long time ago on a radio they built, and the ties used to take them in batteries. So that was definitely a battery one. And they used to take them in batteries. How they charged them, if they were, if I don't honestly know, but that the article was the ties used to take them in batteries every now and again. So that must have been 12 volt.
There's articles or stories of POWs swapping flat batteries for the live batteries on Japanese lorries.
Yeah, that's right.
Steve Cairns got a beating up for that.
And pinching stuff out. There was a radio engineer, and the Japanese used to take them in, the radios, for him to repair.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And he used to take bits out. So he used to take bits out, because you can do. I mean, if you've got an RF section and you've got an RF amplifier, you can take that bit out, and that'll still work, but it won't be so good. And then he used to use these bits to build one. That's ridiculous. So he used the Japanese radios to build a radio.
Yeah.
Oh dear, it's fantastic. And I mean, I couldn't see. I mean, when I took my apprenticeship, most of our apprenticeship then was in building stuff. So building capacitors, building transformers, just building the components and working out how to build the components. So that was quite technical, and I couldn't see how they made capacitors, resistors, and whatever, but they did. And that's fantastic how they did it. But to make, I mean, when I was an apprentice, if you'll spend a lot of time working out how to get a specific capacitor value, and they made them. They just made them in the camps by using odds and ends. It's absolutely fantastic how they did it. But they were really genned up blokes. But
Eric Lomax was one of them, wasn't he?
Yeah, I can't remember the names now, because I did that about 15 years ago. Yeah. That was one of the first ones I put on, because of course that interested me, because radio, you know. But getting on to radio, I nothing to do with it, but I've got rid of all my radio and television collection now. I put it into auction at DIS. So one of my favourite ones was a record maker, and this was before tape recorders came out. And what they did is they had a disc, an ordinary disc, and they put a carbon in the middle, compact it, and so the stylus followed the line across the record, and that was actually putting information on the carbon disc as it went.
Right.
So it was like a tape recorder, but that was Pi made it, and that only lasted a year, because then tape recorders came out, and that was my favourite. I did that up, and that was absolutely fantastic. How I got the records is I knew what it was, a record maker. I had the microphone and everything to go with it, because it's a radiogram. It looks like a radiogram with a turntable and everything. It looks just like an ordinary radiogram, but it was a record maker. And I put it on, because I used to put it on a site connected with my work, and I put it on there, and a woman got in touch, and she said, "Does it work?" So I said, "Yeah, I've got it all working." She said, "Well, we used to have one, and my husband's now dead, but I've got his recordings on 3 discs, and I didn't have any discs." And she said, "I've got three discs with his recordings on. Could you possibly put them on tape for me?" So I said, "Yeah, I'll do that." She said, "Well, how much do I owe you?" So I said, "Do you want the discs back?" She said, "Why?" So I said, "Well, if I record them all for you, can I keep the discs?" She said, "Yes."
Oh, well,
got 3 discs. Oh, I got 3 discs. Absolutely brilliant. So that was the prize one in the auction, and that fetched 350 quid. I was really chuffed for that. 350 quid. That was a beautiful sound. I mean, the old valve stuff was a lot better sound than the new stuff. A lot better, more depth.
Yeah, some of them are going back to valves now, believe it or not.
Yeah, I did get myself a valve unit to put underneath my telly, bar, a valve bar made by Samsung, but that wasn't like the old valve stuff.
No.
You know,
It's 10:30.
The old valve stuff had depth, and I know this gets off the subject, but when I was an apprentice, I didn't get much money. I mean, the first year my wage was £2.76, and out of that, they took everything they had to take out. So I could only go out with my mates once a week after we played football, and on a Saturday night, and I didn't have much money, so stereo was then coming out. It was very, very new. So I used to build speakers, bass reflex, not that tall, and I used to build them for people and sell them. And have you heard of Punton, who used to play for Norwich City? No. When we got married, we lived about 2 doors away from him, and I built him some. So he had some. Anyway, getting off that, get me talking on radio, and I wouldn't stop. It's been an interesting week on Facebook, and there's been some interesting stuff come up, but some of it people repeat so much. You've heard it all before. There's the same stories come up, don't they? I started off the chat for just the members, so the members can chat if they want to. And the chat has also got, you can use a camera and mic. So we ought to have a look at that at some time and see if we can use it to communicate.
Yeah. Can I just add though, Ronnie, that not to use it at unsocial hours like
no.
Some of us leave our phones on, and we get an early alarm call at ridiculous hours, especially from people in Australia.
Oh yeah,
yeah. He isn't on this morning, is he?
No, he's doing his gig in Singapore, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
You miss him coming on though, don't you?
Yeah. Always a mine of information.
He's always got something interesting to say.
Me and Martin, we were on, I think it must have been the last Blue Jeans conference, and I was in Thailand, and he was in Australia, and we had a good old chat for about 3/4 of an hour. It was
was
really
that when
good.
I was ill?
I think it must have been.
I came on, but I had to go off.
Oh yeah, that's right. You did.
I felt terrible.
Cameo appearance.
I don't feel so good now. I think the stress of packing everything up and everything that gets to you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
There's something else I wanted to bring up, but I can't remember what it was.
Well, I'll tell you something unusual that happened. I mean, I was just after Christmas or just after New Year. I was at the FEPOW building at Aura was, and there was a chap there with his kids, and he said, "Look, let me show you the windows your granddad designed." And my ears pricked up because the only windows there are the Java windows. And sure enough, he is the grandson. No, he is the son of Lieutenant Commander Upton. He's got my contact details, but he's never been back in touch. And I got a message from one of the volunteers there. Said, "Could you find out something for me, Keith?" He said, "You did it for my dad. Can you do it for this guy?" I said, "Yeah, okay, I can do that." I said, "What's so interesting about him?" He said, "Well, number one, he comes from the village where I am. Number two, he designed the chapel at Tanjong Priok." I thought, what's the chances in less than 2 weeks? And they've actually sent me attachments of the drawings, but I'm going to have to say to the family, "Look, what do you want me to do with these? Because I just don't want to share them like that." And also, he used to design concert programs. So we got a couple of those as well. More to follow on that one.
Yeah, I did get your liberation questionnaire you sent me for
good.
Samuel. I've added the camps on his page, so that does look better. I had some of it, but I didn't have the first two Kuala Lumpur and the one before.
Mm.
So I've had that, and the dates are important because that.
Oh yeah.
One of the dates though that didn't tie in. The date from Kuala Lumpur to Changi, because I was talking to Jonathan about that, Jonathan Moffat, and he's quite keyed up on Java, isn't he? And so I was talking to him about it, and it seems as though, because I said, why did they send them to Changi when at the same time they were sending them up country?
Yeah, well, there were two
to
parties,
Thailand,
weren't there?
because there was 2 trains left on the 14th, the 10th, I think it was,
Yeah.
from Kuala Lumpur to Thailand, and he was sent to Changi on the 15th, I think it was, according to the records I got off Q. He was sent to Changi, and then just slightly after that, he was sent up country. So I said, well, why send him all the way back to Changi when they could have sent him up country from there?
I thought the only train going to Changi was the 2nd of October. That's the only one I know of.
Well, he said that Jonathan said that was the 15th, but that on that record it said it was the 3rd, so it didn't tie in with the records on Q and what he'd written on his liberation questionnaire, because he'd written the 3rd, and on the records it was the 15th. So I don't know which is true. But anyway, Jonathan said they did send quite a few trains to Changi, and then they went up country.
Have a look. Got the Nelson file here.
I think on his file that said the 3rd of the 10th. So it's the only thing I got stuck on.
Here we go, yeah. No, it's not got it on here. On the Nelson file, Kuala Lumpur to Bampong, on the 14th, there was a train before that. I know there was a train before that on the 2nd, because it's on the rolls. So I'll see if I can find the rolls. It's on my laptop.
Yeah, if you can, because that didn't make sense to me. But Jonathan said that happened. They did send a few trains to Changi.
Yeah.
But that seems silly. You send them to Changi, then send them up country.
Down and up again. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have a look for that one.
Yeah, if you can.
Yeah, see what I can find for it.
Yeah. You know how I did it that now. I didn't put, because my dad, was in the June party, so he was on train number 1. So what I did is I've gone right the way through, and I've labelled the trains, first train up to the 82nd, I think it was, and I've put 82nd train from Singapore to Thailand, because that flows better. Because if you say train 5, that could be train 5 of any of the parties.
Yeah, I mean, in the nominal rolls, if you're D, F, and H, they actually do it by a train number for that party. So for F-Force, it'd be trains 1 to 13, and that's how they were writing them down.
Well, I've done it the other way.
So much. Well, yeah, it gives you an idea of the sheer volume of transport.
Oh yeah, I mean, 82 trains.
That's a fair
Singapore to
old
Thailand.
lick. Yeah.
And then you've got to think they've then had the ships going to Burma.
Yep.
So there's
you've got that lot. You've got that lot coming back down, and you haven't got a log of the trains coming back.
Yeah. So you can say 82 trains, roughly 600 per train. Yeah. Yeah. And you can work out roughly how many went to Thailand.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic, really. Oh, and another one I had was someone got in touch during the week about his father, and can I tell him? No, that wasn't Thailand. That was the 600 the Gunners, the Gunners Party, and he got in touch and said, I mean, I've explained it all on the atrocities, and he said he'd found the page. But he said, can you tell me how he died? you explain to people, nobody know how they died. The mass burial ground was
you have
found.
no idea. It can either be friendly
No
fire
idea.
or bayoneting or whatever.
Yeah, because
There's
I
just
mean,
no idea.
according to the Chinese on the island, a lot of them did die when the US bombed it.
Yeah.
So they bombed the airstrip, and the camp was very close to the airstrip, wasn't it? So a lot of them did die. Oh, that other one. The other one about the roof collapsing.
Oh yes, that was the Canadians.
That was a peculiar one, because she got in touch and she said he died, blah blah blah. So I started looking it up, and I found a list of 8, which you found as well. I found a list of 8, and then I went into Roger's site, Roger Mansell, and looked up the records, and he does say the roof collapsed and 8 people got killed.
Yeah.
And the date coincided with, so you know for a fact they died when the roof collapsed.
Yeah.
To the weight of the snow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's 2 o'clock in the morning.
Oh, no. I'm pushing out the Zeds by then.
Yeah, but 2 o'clock in the morning, I mean, they'd all been in bed asleep.
Yeah.
Wouldn't they? So the roof collapsed and they'd all be in bed, and of course they didn't stand on earth, did they?
No.
But multiple injuries. That's what it said on the thing. Multiple injuries, and I think 2 of them died about 2 days later from injuries. So things happen now. Oh, another one I had, peculiar. I mean, we've all heard that the food that the Americans dropped did kill some POWs.
Yeah.
And this one, quite a few got killed. Hit by food being dropped. They got right the way through the war.
Oh, yeah.
And all the way through the camps, and they were killed after liberation by the Americans dropping food.
Or some of them went out and tried to get themselves absolutely drunk on wood alcohol, and that killed them.
Yeah, I read that one as well. Yeah, I can't remember where that was.
I think it's probably
where that was.
Probably one of the Japanese camps. Probably one of the camps in Japan. But I know there were a couple.
And then there was another one. They drank meths.
Yeah.
Yeah, they made meths and drunk meths. Oh, yeah. But Dad said after the war, he said when they were released, a lot of them did go out and make up for the time they'd lost. But Dad said he found a Saigon family that were very friendly, French family, and he used to go round theirs for food. They invited him round there for food, so he used to go round there for food. And on the way home, he witnessed a French family being attacked by Viet Cong, whatever you'd like to call them at that time. I don't think they were Viet Cong then, but they were attacking the French with sharpened bamboo canes. And he said he wouldn't go out again. He said, I weren't going to leave it after that. He said, you were told to keep out of it all. He said, and how can you keep out of it all when you're seeing families with kids being attacked? You know, it's horrible.
There's another story that I've unearthed, a little bit similar to that, in a place called Taket, which is just on the border with Thailand, northeast Thailand, near Ubon. And the French were still there because it was French Indochina in those days, and they were still around. And the Japanese had surrendered. But the Annamites, who were the Viet Minh before the Viet Cong, they were Annamites.
They're called Annamites. Oh.
Annamites, yeah. And
I'm Norfolk, remember.
They were they didn't want to allow the French to continue with their administration of the country. Now, just a little bit further back from that, the French were in Europe. The Germans took over the French government in 1940, and then the French Indochina was ruled by what was the Vichy French. Now, when France was liberated by after D-Day in 1944, the Vichy French government just sort of fell apart, and all of a sudden the French then became our allies. So after the war had finished in the Far East, you still with me?
Yeah.
We had a sort of obligation to look after the French in these little outposts like Taquet, which was just a small village in those days. Now there was a French garrison there, and the British officer who was looking after that area, a chap called Major Kemp, was very friendly with the French officer, and he was on the opposite side of the river in Thailand. But the French officer came over and they said, "Well, we need to get some supplies over to the garrison." Okay, well, not a problem. We'll get the supplies and take the ferry across. So they loaded up the boat, and at the same time there was an American operation, the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, was led by a chap called Major Bank, and he came down unannounced, unauthorized in the area and started throwing his weight around. And the Americans at that time didn't want the French to recolonize French Indochina. So they were sort of standing on the side, not really helping the French, but in a way, sort of giving their support to the Annamites. Anyway, one of the other officers of Major Banks's group was given a lift back from Nakhon Phanom, as it was, over to Taquet. So there's three of them on the boat, and when they got to Taquet on the French side, the Annamites ambushed them, and they said, "Kemp and the American come over, but we are arresting the Frenchman." And Major Kemp said, "No, you're not. You know, that's not going to happen." And the American just stood on one side and watched all this, didn't intervene at all. So Kemp thought the best thing to do is get back over to Thailand. So they walked back to the boat, and he put himself between the French officer and the Annamites. But the Annamites came behind Major Kemp, stuck a rifle under his arm, and shot dead the French officer at point blank range. And the American just stood by. And he was under orders from Major Bank not to intervene with anything. And, you know, they didn't want the French involved in recolonizing the country. After that, Kemp was, you know, he was extremely upset with this, angry to the point of, you know, going ballistic. But he got the boat back and sent a message back to, well, Major Smiley got involved then, and they sent a message back to Calcutta asking why the Americans were in that area when they blatantly shouldn't have been. And a message came back to Major Bank to get the hell out of the place. He's not allowed there. And Smiley went over to see Major Bank before he moved back, and he said he was one of the most despicable men he'd ever met, completely irresponsible, and had just taken it upon himself to do things without authorization.
Yeah.
So that's another instance of what happened after liberation.
Yeah, Dan said they had orders not to get involved in anything that was happening in French Indochina when they, you know, were liberated. They had to stay out of it. No matter what it was, they stayed out of it. They weren't allowed. And as Dad said, how can you stand by and watch families being attacked? You know, you just, particularly children. You know, how can you do that? But he said he wouldn't go out again. He waited. Because they flew out of Saigon to Bangkok, then on to Rangoon, and he said he just waited for his flight to come up. That was it. How did the? Because I had one in Thailand that caught the chitral. So how did they get to Rangoon from Thailand?
They flew.
They definitely flew, did they?
Yeah, they were. But my father was at a place called Tackley, where they were building an airstrip, which I believe is now still used by the Thai Air Force. They completed the airstrip because the camp was under the control of the Imperial Japanese Air Force, not the Army. When they completed the camp, lo and behold, the surrender came, and the only people to use the runway were the British. And they were flying Dakotas out of that camp, and there were other camps nearby. And I think Pet Buri was one of them. That's probably not the right pronunciation, I know, but there's a couple of camps near there. They just got the men to this airstrip and flew them out.
Yeah.
Some did go by train, to be honest. I think Ubon, did they go by train initially, Ray?
Well, they went from Ubon to Bangkok by train.
Yeah, that's it. Remember that
there
bit.
was quite a delay with the guys at Ubon. It was about 6 weeks after the liberation that they started to move out, because they weren't sure whether to fly them out or whether to take them by train. Anyway, Tuzi went back to, he stayed in Ubon quite a while, but nothing was happening, so he went back to Bangkok to kick a few backsides, and then the decision was made to send them all back by train, which they did in 2 lots.
So they got them to Bangkok, and then they flew from Bangkok, like my dad went from Saigon to Bangkok, then on to Rangoon.
Yeah.
So they flew them from Bangkok to Rangoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, to the hospital camps there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think I've told you before, the first plane out of Saigon had the injured on board, and that actually got to Bangkok and crashed, taken off, and killed everyone on board. So it's horrible, isn't it? First chance of being freedom, and plane crashed.
It's quite interesting. In French Indochina, when I think it was the British forces went into French Indochina after the liberation, and they were having terrible trouble, obviously, with the Viet Minh. And they thought, we haven't got the men here. Hang them out. So they rearmed the Japanese.
Yeah.
And the Japanese went and took them out, or sorted them out. And I think there's even cases where they repainted Japanese aircraft with the SEAC roundel and got the Japanese pilots to fly. And he said the Japanese were excellent soldiers, obeyed any orders,
Dad said they were very good soldiers. Yeah. I mean, you get a lot of hate things on Facebook, but there were some good Japanese. I mean, they weren't all bad. I mean, they were good Japanese. Dad made mates with Ollie, I think is Otter. And Dad always said he'd love to have met him after the war because they used to give him cigarettes and food. He said there were some good ones. You can't say we'd have bad ones as well. We'd have bully boys. We'd have boys that would take it out on prisoners. I
mean, in the FEPOW archive, there are a couple of letters from POWs that were at Tackley to the commander of the camp, thanking him for looking after them and what excellent care it was. And I think he died of cancer in the 80s. But I've got want to look the letters up again because they're quite interesting. It'd be interesting then to follow those guys back and see where they were.
Yeah, but that we were talking just earlier. We were talking about the 600 gunners, and although the Chinese did put in reports, they got it's a bit awkward because they got a lot of the stuff because they said they're Australians on Balali. But of course we know now they weren't. They were definitely British because the stuff they found there. But the statement I put on, have you read that? The statement from the Japanese commander on Balali?
Oh, is the Asaki or Ataki? Yeah, it was that.
It's absolutely ridiculous statement.
Yeah, the guy that was going to commit suicide but never did.
Yeah, but that's a ridiculous statement. When you read it, he blames everybody else
but him
for what happened.
Yeah,
you know, he said he just landed, and he was walking to the camp, and one of the POWs walked towards him, or something happened, and one of the Japanese bayoneted him and killed him. And he says, it's not my fault. That was the soldier. The soldier did it. It's not my fault. That's ridiculous.
But it's like somebody I've just researched for Sess, and evidently it's his daughter-in-law's father.
Yeah. Sess Lowry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just researched it for him, and it would appear that this guy was on the Ballet list and got his name taken off.
Yeah. I found about 6 or 7 now that were on the list, but they ended up somewhere else. One in Japan, you know, so they didn't all go. If you have a look at the list I put on there,
one died in Labuan.
Yeah,
one died in Labuan.
I'll put underneath which ones I found didn't go to Balali, and they were sent. This one actually sent a letter in after the war, after he was liberated, saying that he was ill, and they took him out of the ship because he was ill, and he was sent elsewhere.
Cool, he was that close. Yeah,
that was that close. You'll read some of that. That's quite interesting. If you have a look at the atrocities, and I'll put 600 gunners in there, and I have put the letters in there. I wrote the letters out, so that there is the actual letters they sent in after the war saying, I didn't go to Balali, blah, blah, blah.
What was it? It was 2017, I think. It might have been earlier this year, I don't know. But two of them, two relatives of two survivors, contacted me near enough the same time. And I think one of them's on Facebook.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that. And I then got a phone call from Alf Baker's widow. And she said, Keith, you don't know me. And I said, yes, I do. We have met. We've met twice. We're chatting. So he said, well, I'm wondering if I could ask you a big favour. She said, I know I said to FEPOW sell Alf's books. He said, but it doesn't seem right to sell them to survivors. And I said, no, it doesn't. I said, leave it with me. And I said, I'll speak to the trustees and we'll get them sent to them free of charge, which we did. Yeah. But to get two of the survivors, literally within weeks of each other, just the families of the survivors, can you tell me about? You think, good grief. And of course, they were both Royal Artillery, which got my interest right away.
Yeah. Well, I got up to, I think it was 8 missing on my list for Balali. I had about 8 missing out of the ones that are supposed to have been sent to Balali from Revolt. There was 8 missing. And I found 7 that were on the list. They went to Balali, but they didn't. They didn't go to Balali at all.
Oh, right.
So that wasn't a 600 gunners party. No. That was less than that.
Well, the roll at Q only lists 572, but we don't know whether that's a complete roll.
Yeah, that's the same as mine. Mine's 572. That's right. The 8. Yeah. That's the 8 that are missing. But no, that's rather peculiar. I mean, Balali is a bit of a, you think, well, how can you lose that many men? But at the beginning, when they were dying, they took them out in baskets and dropped them overboard.
Yeah, in rice sacks or whatever.
They got rid of them overboard. So the 400 must have been near the end who were found. That could have been the bombing.
It's 11 hours.
And then they just, like they did at Sandakan, just finished the rest off.
Well, evidently, and I've not shared it on Facebook, but the camp at Kuching with the civilians in and the POWs, had the Australians not arrived when they did, on the 18th of September, they were scheduled for a march to another camp 17 miles away.
Yeah.
And the Australian medical team said there's a very good chance that the bulk of those people would not have survived. So it was the Australians arrived, I think, early September, which is just right. But that started because somebody was talking about a work camp 20 miles away from Kuching building a road. And I found the documentation. I thought, great, okay, wrote it all down. And I made the mistake of reading the rest of the report, which is where I found that information. And that really, really upset me a bit. I thought, Christ almighty, there but for the grace of God. And it was men, women, kids. So you wouldn't have got Agnes Keith writing 3 came home. You wouldn't have got any of that at all.
No.
So.
No, I think I told you before, Sandakan, someone got in touch and wanted to know what happened to blah, blah, blah. And I looked that up, and he was the last one at Sandakan, and he was in the cage, because they had a big tree with a cage on it, didn't they? And he was actually in the cage, and they took him out and crucified him.
Oh, yeah, I heard of that one.
Yeah,
Awful.
horrible, how can you do that? Anyway, we've had a good chat.
Can I just ask Keith a question?
Yeah.
Go on then.
Keith, going back to these newspapers that Fenella has,
Yeah.
she's undecided where to archive these, and I mentioned possibly the Arboretum. Mention your name. What would be the chances of that? I mean, if they did donate them there, would they be seen? Would they be archived? Or just
they would be archived up in the building. If anybody wants to view them, it's a phone call to me, and I'll make sure I'm up there so they can see them.
So access to these is a lot easier than if she went to the Imperial War Museum, for example.
The danger, I won't talk the Imperial War Museum down, but from what we've been told from the IWM themselves, they have a backlog on the Far East catalogue, and it's not getting done.
Yeah, it can just get put in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly do, having spoken to another little local museum here that's doing some work on Far East and POW stuff, is get some archival papers and that, so it's all acid free, to preserve them in really good condition, and then keep them flat. That's what I would have to keep them flat. But yes, we could put them in the archive. That wouldn't be a problem, and they could be viewed by appointment. The only thing we don't do, because we haven't got permanent staff there, is advertise what's in our archive.
Yeah.
So I mean, you sort of think to yourself, well, do we put this on the website? Is that a good idea? I'd have to speak to the NMA about, have you got security here? And they probably say, well, yes, we've got cameras in the building. Well, yeah, that's fine. That tells you he's been in the building, but that doesn't stop him nicking the stuff. So somebody, I mean, Ken Hewitt said, can't you just put what you got there online? And the trustees at that time said no, but yes, we do have an index there, but of course it's all, you have to visit to see it. There's one guy that contacted me this week, and it was about a FEPOW that died 20 odd years ago. He wrote his story, and he said, well, it's with a friend of mine. So I said, we can deposit it in the archive. He said, oh, will we be able to view it online? So I said, no, but if you give permission for it to go online, because your friend is the last person who owns that material, it was given to her. If she gives permission, I'll have a word with the webmaster. We can scan it scan the pages in as a story, and it will go online and be kept in the archive as well. So you know where the hard copy is. So we could do it like that. But if she doesn't want them shared online, then I wouldn't go down that road.
Yeah, I'm not sure why she doesn't really, because it's not personal stories to her.
It's the trouble is, if somebody's got something and that's their wish, then
exactly. Yeah,
you've got to obey them, really. But no, I don't know why. But having said that, I've got stacks of stuff here that I should be putting online, so I better get my finger out and do it, I think.
Yeah, there's always something to do, Keith.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I've still got about 6 projects I started and I haven't finished. You just get stopped, don't you?
Yeah.
And you go on to something else.
That's what you would have, I think, ever talk about F&H force reports.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So I've got a hard copy here from the National Archives.
Yeah, that's right. I said I'd have a chat with you today about it, didn't I? Yeah. You've got a hard copy. Can you do anything with them?
In terms of,
Copies?
yep, I can do that. I can tap the guys up at work and see if I go in and borrow their A3 copier.
Yeah, and then I can
put it on the
do
list.
something about putting them on.
Yep. Ron, F&H, copies. Right.
Keith, what I will do is I'll send an email to Fenella and give her your email address, if that's okay with you.
Yep.
And if she decides to do that, because I think that sounds a better option than the Imperial War Museum.
Yeah, I mean, you would know from the conferences, we did sort of volunteer our services. You know, show us what to do, and we will archive for you. And it came back, yeah, well, the trouble is we then have trouble with the unions because we've laid off staff, and we're bringing in volunteers. All sorts of things will happen, which is a great shame because there is a wealth of material out there. It seems to be a little bit harder to get hold of now. If you want to go and view documents, you need to know what the documents are, and B, you've got to give 5 days notice because they're all stored in a purpose-built facility at Duxford.
Yeah, but don't you find this now with a lot of things, Keith, that, I mean, my family were fishermen and the driftermen in their spare time, because when they were offshore and when they were at sea, they weren't always fishing, of course. So in their spare time, they built boots. So they actually carved boots. And I've got about 7 or 8. And I got in touch with Yarmouth Museum and said, drifter, it was all about drifters and everything. And I said to them, I've got these boots, or I want somewhere to put them so people can see them. And they weren't interested. They just weren't interested. That's absolutely stupid because...
It's loopy, isn't it? Absolutely ridiculous.
It's absolutely stupid. I mean, they got stuff about Nelson. Of course, Nelson came to Yarmouth. Well, I don't know if you know, but he did come to Yarmouth. And,
Nelson used to live with Lady Hamilton at Merton Hall. Morden Hall, which is near where I used to live. It was just down the road. It's a National Trust site now.
Yeah. But that just annoys, doesn't it? So I said to them, "Oh, forget it." So I still got them.
It is heartbreaking.
They're not brilliant boots, but that's what they used to do.
Yeah, it's part of history. It's part of heritage. But
anyway, good chat. And I'll let you know later about the house, not on the moon. I'm just
okay, mate.
With it. I'm so cheesed off with it. Anyway, just turn the record off, okay?
Yep.